Hello, I'm Matthias, and today I will talk about the life of Ramanujan, who was a famous Indian mathematician that was active in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So first we'll talk about his early life, and before we begin, I promise I'll try to pronounce these names as best as possible, but if I don't quite pronounce them correctly, please forgive me. So Srinivasa Ramanujan was born in Erode, India on December 22, 1887. He was born to an upper caste Brahmin family. His father was a clerk at a sari shop, while his mother sang at the local temple. Unfortunately, all three of his brothers died before their first birthday, and he grew close with his mother as his father often had to stay at work late. From the beginning, Ramanujan showed an early interest and talent in the mathematics as he rediscovers sophisticated formulas, theorems, and an example of this is when he independently discovers and investigates the Bernoulli numbers, which are a sequence of numbers that show up frequently in mathematical analysis. And all of this was done at a young age and with little formal mathematical training, which makes it all the more impressive. Adulthood. Ironically, although Ramanujan showed an early talent in the mathematics, he was unable to graduate from college because he focused only on math while neglecting other studies in areas that he found less interesting. And as a result, he lived in extreme poverty for a couple of years, at times even to the point of starvation. Luckily, Ramanujan slowly gains recognition after a 1910 meeting between him and V. Ramaswamy Iyer, the founder of the Indian Mathematical Society. After this meeting, he is able to obtain a research position at the University of Madras. In July 14 of 1909, Ramanujan marries Janaki, his future wife, and like most marriages at the time in India, this was an arranged marriage. Ramanujan also continued his investigation of the Bernoulli numbers, and although some of his work is sent to leading British mathematicians, for the time being he is largely ignored by them. Luckily for the world and us, Ramanujan's work slowly gained more attention. In fact, when Ramanujan writes to G. H. Hardy, one of the leading British mathematicians at the time, to his surprise, Hardy actually writes back. In their letter, Ramanujan had asked for advice and sent some of his mathematical work, including some of the infinite series he had investigated. Finally, Hardy had originally thought that they were a fraud because at the time Ramanujan's name wasn't as well known, but when Hardy went through some of the work, he was impressed, and although he wasn't able to verify some of the results, he believed them since, quote, no one would have the imagination to invent them. When Hardy shows these letters to one of his colleagues, John Littlewood, Littlewood is equally impressed, and as a result, Ramanujan is invited to visit Cambridge University, but he initially refuses, and this refusal was due to a desire to not visit foreign lands in accordance with the cultural values of his Brahmin caste. But eventually, he decides to go in March of 1914. This will kick off a new period in Ramanujan's life. So Ramanujan will stay at Cambridge for 5 years before returning to India shortly before his death. And while he's there, he will face certain challenges, including racism. He also has to deal with an unfamiliar diet that prevents him from maintaining the strict dietary restrictions of his Hindu faith. There are also cultural differences. Hardy was an atheist, while Ramanujan was deeply religious. In fact, Ramanujan saw something divine in the mathematics. Ramanujan also relied mainly on intuition, while Hardy favored rigorous proofs. When you publish a mathematical paper, you have to give proof to the statements they claim are true, but to Ramanujan this was an unfamiliar concept as he didn't have the typical mathematical background of the mathematicians at the time. But Hardy does admit that Ramanujan's intuition is on the level of two mathematical giants, Euler and Jacobi. Hardy tries to support Ramanujan by helping him with the formal proofs needed to publish his results, but this was always a fine balance between forcing Ramanujan to use this rigorous structure and keeping his inspiration and intuition alive and well. Next, we will talk about some of Ramanujan's discoveries. So, Ramanujan investigated the theory of partitions, and partitions are the number of ways to write an integer as a sum of non-decreasing positive integers. For example, 1 plus 1 plus 2 is a partition of 4, 1 plus 3 is a partition of 4, 2 plus 2 is a partition of 4, but 1 plus 3 and 3 plus 1 will be considered the same partition of 4. And what Ramanujan did is he found an asymptotic formula for the partition function p of n, and p of n would denote the number of partitions of an integer n. And although this may seem like the problem statement might seem a bit simple, this is actually a very hard thing to do. So what Ramanujan did is that he found a bound, or kind of like an approximation for the partition function at large values of n. Yeah, so next, Ramanujan also investigated infinite series, and one of his most well-known infinite series is the one for pi, and his infinite series is one of the fastest ways to calculate the digits of pi. And the formula on the right on the screen, this is one of the approximations for pi that Ramanujan found, and when you plug it into a calculator, you can see that it is highly accurate. So Ramanujan produces a plethora of infinite series and formulas that provide unique mathematical insights. Ramanujan also worked with mock theta functions, and I'm not going to pretend I know what they are, so if you're interested, you can search them up in your own time. There's also the Ramanujan conjecture, and this one was highly influential in later work, as it paved the way for the theories and intuition for Fermat's last theorem, which was proved, I believe, around the 1990s. However, Ramanujan's declining health forces him to return to India, and this wasn't surprising because he had a history of health problems, and some exacerbating factors might have been the lesser resilience that he had, caused by the difficulty of maintaining dietary restrictions in adherence to his Hindu faith, and the wartime rations that made it more difficult. In 1920, about 1 year after his return to India, Ramanujan dies. However, Ramanujan's legacy still lives on. Many of his contributions and discoveries have inspired several other mathematicians and their work. And although this was before his death, in May of 1918, he was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society, and this was significant as one, he was only the second Indian scholar to be elected a Fellow of the Society, and two, he was one of the youngest members ever elected to be a Fellow. In October of the same year, he is elected a Fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge, and this one is also significant because Trinity College is one of the premier colleges that make up Cambridge University. When Ramanujan's lost notebooks are discovered, it provokes excitement. They contain several of his discoveries that hadn't been known previously. And also, there's this movie called A Man Who Knew Infinity, and this is personally how I first came to know more about Ramanujan, so I encourage you to watch the movie if you are more interested. Thanks for listening.